Is there anything we can find in the Bible that can point to it as being divinely written? Anything at all? Any information that only an all-knowing God could possibly have known? The answer is no. This is terribly unfortunate for the faithful, and rather embarrassing for an all-powerful and all-knowing God. In this video, I will ignore the fantastically bizarre stories in the Bible, such as talking animals or staffs turning into snakes, and only observe information the Bible contains concerning how the real world works. The entire chapter of Leviticus 14 is dealing with leprosy. Leprosy was a common plague which God was very concerned about, and offers instruction on how to overcome this frightening disease. The all-knowing and all-powerful God provides in detail how to detect and be cleansed from leprosy.
Then shall the priest command to take for him, that is to be cleansed, 2 birds alive and clean, and cedar wood, and scarlet, and hyssop. And the priest shall command that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, and the cedar wood, and the scarlet, and hyssop, and shall dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. And he shall sprinkle upon him that is to be cleansed from the leprosy 7 times, and shall pronounce him clean.
Folks, this is voodoo. This magic spell is bogus, if not dangerous. God continues to explain how one should deal with a home that is contaminated with leprosy.
And he shall look on the plague, and behold, if the plague be in the walls of the house with hollow streaks, greenish or reddish, and the appearance thereof be lower than the wall, then he that owneth the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, There seemeth to me to be as it were a plague in the house.
This is very alarming. Leprosy does not live on walls or in stains. In fact, it can only survive within a living host. Shouldn't the all-powerful, all-knowing God know about this? There is no apologetic excuse for this. God is wrong. Furthermore, leprosy is very hard to contract. It is transmitted by nasal droplets and is very contagious only when somebody sneezes. It seems very odd that God wouldn't simply tell people to cover themselves when they sneeze, or explain to them that it is carried in mucus and not the stains on their walls. With all of God's effort to help relieve people of leprosy, it appears as though God didn't understand what was really going on. Why didn't God teach them how to grow a mold that produces penicillin? That would have easily reduced the cases of leprosy and a great number of other infections. This would be the kind of revelation I am looking for. Anything that only God could have known at that time. In the New Testament, we learn that after Jesus resurrected, he spent 40 days on earth before floating up into the clouds. What was Jesus doing with all of this time on earth? Was he hiding? Why is there no history of this? Oh, by the way, the guy you executed, he is actually God and is hanging out in Jerusalem today. Not only is this story ridiculous, but why didn't Jesus provide any sound information? Why didn't Jesus teach about germs while he was strolling around for 40 days? Understanding microbiology and the importance of boiling water and washing hands could have saved millions of people from plagues and provided humanity with proof that God had knowledge above the common man. Instead, the book of John tells us about a magical pool that gets stirred up by an angel, and whoever gets in first is healed. A one-time healing for the first person in the pool. I assert that this is clearly a fable and ridiculous. Why didn't Jesus explain how the sun is a star in which the earth rotates? Instead, we are told in the book of Matthew that blind people are possessed with devils. Nobody believes this today, and I'm certain Christians would not go around saying it. I'm suggesting that God knew nothing more about the world than the common man of that day, and the Bible verifies this conclusion extensively. In the book of Revelation, the author suggests that stars are like little dots of light that can fall down to the earth.
And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind.
One verse later, the people are hiding in rocks from these falling stars. If these texts are God-written or inspired, shouldn't God know what a star is? This is the same sentiment we discover in the Old Testament.
And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them.
The New Testament states,
And the stars shall fall from heaven.
And this verse continues as though people will still inhabit the earth after the stars have fallen on it.
Afterwards, all the tribes of the earth shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds.
Every tribe on earth seeing Jesus descend from a cloud after all of the stars have fallen to the ground also indicates to us that the authors believed the earth was flat, such as this verse found in the book of Luke.
And the devil, taking him up into a high mountain, shewed unto him all the kingdoms of the world.
The Bible's interpretation of geography and astronomy are ludicrous in the light of modern science. How could an all-knowing, all-powerful God produce such profoundly inaccurate text? James Fergus, being quoted from a speech in 1883, said, "The Christian religion brought about a long period of ignorance, still known as the Dark Ages, during which thought was curbed, common education banished, and conscience given over to a rude, vulgar, and ignorant priesthood." The Christian Church has had a long history of wrestling with problems derived from advancements in knowledge. There are dozens of biblical verses that indicate to us that the early Bible scribes believed the earth was flat or non-moving. Psalm 93:1, Revelation 7:1, Isaiah 11:12, 1 Chronicles 16:30, and others indicate this sentiment, resulting in today's flat earthers harnessing a strong bond and alliance with the Bible. Why didn't God know the earth was moving or spinning through an orbit? The Bible clearly has no understanding of cosmology or the nature of astronomical bodies. These people had no idea what was up beyond the clouds. It was common knowledge that heaven was up there and hell was down below. Knowing what we now know today, when Jesus is rising up into the clouds, up to heaven, where was he going? Orbit? The moon? To the edge of the Milky Way? The Bible's interpretation of reality is demonstrably wrong. Jesus also believed heaven was up in the sky. This is why angels are often described as having wings. This is also why Jesus will return from out of the clouds, and is why the holy city will descend from the clouds, and of course, the devil was underneath the ground. This is why Jesus first descended below ground upon his crucifixion in order to deal with a devil residing down there.
Now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth?
Do Christians really believe a devil lives down there, Hades? Or can they admit that the Bible is wrong? In the book of Joshua, we read about the sun standing still.
And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day.
Essentially, the sun froze in the sky so that Joshua could continue killing the natives. Ironically, this is a loving God's way of helping Joshua. God could have wielded magic powers to kill these natives in a more humane way, but of course, God would rather suspend the entire solar system in order to have Joshua's men finish them off with swords in a violent, bloody death of both women, infants, and children. When we place this story in context with all of the other fantastic magical stories within the Bible, it begins to shed light on just how not divine these books are. There was a Christian that once told me that he has absolute proof that only God could have inspired the Bible by opening up the book of Job and read,
"Can you bind the cluster of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion?"
He continued to inform me that we now know that the cluster of stars in Pleiades are gravitationally bounded and move in unison. And we now know that the 3 stars making up Orion's belt are not gravitationally bounded and are moving apart, hence loosening his belt. He assures me that only God could have known this. This is a classic attempt for the Christian illusionist to try and make something seem divine when it isn't. Every one of us can look up at the stars and conclude what this author had without knowing anything about physics or astronomy. Pleiades is the only cluster of stars that one can see with the naked eye when looking at the night sky. Referring to Pleiades as a cluster of binded stars is not fantastic. Orion was a very popular character in astrology at that time, and noting how the belt appears to be loose is not a divine revelation. It visually looks loosened or about to fall off. It is barely hanging on the hip. The writer of this Bible text is simply referring to what he can see plain as day. There is no divine inspiration here at all. We should be able to recognize how Christian apologists go to great lengths to make it seem like only a God could have written or inspired the Bible. This is no different from the religious scribes of the past, who also traditionally fabricate this divine nature by the use of fulfillment prophecies. One of the most famous being Nebuchadnezzar's dream, whereas the book of Daniel seems to predict future empires in the shape of a statue. When we study the book of Daniel, we will learn that Daniel is a compilation of different writings at different times, and most scholars date these passages at 165 BC. Essentially, this is not a case of prophecy looking forward, but it is history looking backwards. The New Testament also produces this illusion by ascribing to Jesus events that were to be fulfilled from earlier religious texts. This trick is achievable with nothing more than a stroke of a pen. We need to be careful not to be lured into these clever attempts to deceive us into believing. If this God were all-knowing and powerful and inspired or wrote the Bible, tricks or illusions should not be the primary source of credulence. We should expect a great wealth of knowledge that only a God could know. The Bible is completely void of any such information. Many characters in the Bible are told to have directly talked with God, which is very similar to the psychics we are seeing today who claim they can communicate with other worlds or talk to the dead. Even within the Bible itself, King Solomon visits a psychic to conjure up a dead prophet. In the book of Matthew, we read about Moses and Elias, who had long been deceased, appearing as ghosts and consulting with Jesus, in which nothing more is ever noted about the event. What I find truly absurd is this. With such incredible communications going on with God or people on the other side, nothing useful or interesting ever seems to come forth. Thomas Edison actually brought something into the world that helps us. He built a light bulb. What have psychics brought to the table? What new revelation did Jesus produce? A reward or punishment program? Heaven and hell were already popularized by the Greeks. A blood sacrifice for forgiveness? Spilling blood as a scapegoat for sinners was practiced by many earlier cultures. It's barbaric. Jesus brought nothing new. Christianity's desire to proselytize, eradicate unique cultures, and dominate the entire planet is disturbing. Isaac Newton went into isolation in 1665 to escape the plague. After 18 months of working, he had discovered the law of gravitation and motion, the field of optics, and invented calculus. When we compare this to the Bible and read passages about how we should stone our wife on her father's doorstep if she isn't a virgin on her wedding day, many of us realize how barbaric and unintelligent the Bible truly is. When Einstein revealed his laws of relativity, it was one of the most incredible uses of intelligence in human history, and not one time were people tempted to say God must have inspired him. How can so many people be so delusional to believe that a creator of the universe, a being far more intelligent than man, wrote the Bible? There is no good reason to believe in such an absurd idea. Furthermore, we should honestly question why a God would need man's help to accomplish such a task. To rely on fallible men who are proven to fabricate, manipulate, and consistently forge religious ideas to convey a divine message is ludicrous. If this God is real, he is clearly reckless and irresponsible with the well-being of humans and their souls. If this God is real, why would he be so similar to all of the other gods of all the other nations? Libraries of information can be found that address these similarities. Judaism mirrors Egyptian culture and beliefs. Christianity mirrors Greek cultures and beliefs. Why is this? Furthermore, this God is often described as having human characteristics. The Bible teaches that God is jealous, angry, loving, wrathful, regretful, happy, sad, and even enjoys the smell of burning meat. I find this to be a bit silly when I try to imagine a powerful God who created this universe and all of the diversified life within it. I would never imagine that God would be a finicky real estate broker for a small tribe of Jews in a Middle Eastern continent, stirring up war and attempting to eradicate its neighbors. I also find that I am disturbed by God's obsessive desire to be worshipped. All ancient religions believed their gods also required worship. A creator of the universe should be far above such vanities. Pharaohs, kings, and rock stars are often saturated in the addiction to this type of vanity. Could a real God be so petty and emotionally bothered by who we worship? In the Bible, we are told that angels worship God non-stop as he sits on his throne in heaven. Really? A throne? If we do not love, worship, and bow down before him, we will be cast into the flames of hell. An idea so conveniently borrowed from the Greeks. If ancient men wrote a book about the history of their nation and their God over the span of 1,000 years, imagine what we might read. How would it be any different from the Bible? When we trace back through human history, we will discover how this God behaves identical to the cultures and people in which it is being created by. The Christian God evolves, and instead of being a revengeful, wrathful God over one chosen nation, it moves into the Middle Ages, being a more civil, loving, imperial Roman God, reaching out to everybody. We can clearly observe how this God has changed with the ever-advancing changes in societies. As we progress into the 21st century, God continues to evolve with us. Women now have liberty to speak in church, wear jewelry, and braid their hair, which is condemned in the New Testament. These verses are now outdated. Even the concept of hell has begun to change into a place not of absolute eternal terror, fire, and brimstone, but simply a separation from God. If we want our God to be a warmongering, bloodthirsty conqueror, we will make him that way. If we want our God to be jealous or enjoy the smell of burning meat, we create him this way. The God that we carry around in our pockets will change with every new generation. Today, Christians continue to recreate their theology, reinterpreting scriptures, or fudging doctrines to fit into today's modern world. God is still evolving. For example, today it is okay for Christians to be filthy rich. Bibles are no longer interesting or held with as much confidence. They are left untouched or only cracked open once every Sunday morning. Many church pastors lean toward preaching sermons that more resemble self-help lectures rather than focusing on biblical verses. I have been seeing how many Christians are loosely formulating their own theologies, much like a choose-your-own interpretation. The modern Christians have a tendency to regard the Bible as mostly metaphors and guidelines. I have recently encountered Christians who readily admit that the stories in the Bible are mythology. Many of them speak of Jesus as if he were more like a hippie love guru and try to harmonize their beliefs more with everybody else's, and might say things like, "There are many roads to the Father." Many of these believers dress like rock stars and cover themselves in tattoos or piercings. Today, the Christian God becomes whatever we choose him to be within our own mind. All of these discussion points add up to one important observation. The biblical God is clearly an evolving figure following traditions and fabrications by men and not the other way around. God does not shape men, men shape God. The Bible has long been losing its reputation for scientific accuracy, and believers are now, more than ever, attempting to bend or synchronize their faith in order to fit with new scientific developments and prosper in a now more advanced world. They bend, twist, and accommodate in order to hang on. I believe they are losing. Their erosion is quickening, and they may all soon end up in the religious graveyards with Zeus and Athena. We must stay at the front lines of this battle. Join me by liking and sharing this content. Every voice, every share is a move forward for our grandchildren. Also, consider joining our membership page and stay closely affiliated with our efforts. Thank you. Stay strong and wise, my friends.